We're live. Yep. Yep. Okay. Great.
Live stream. There we go.
Oh yeah, there we go. 19 seconds and counting.
All right, Angel. Do you guys want the demonstration?
Yeah.
Okay.
Want to learn?
I want to learn. Okay. So I'm going to start by setting up my palette. I've got it mostly set up already, but I'm just going to add some more colors onto where there aren't, where the piles are getting a little bit low. So we're working with oil paint. So it stays wet for quite some time, with the exception of certain colors will kind of dry overnight. So I'm gonna fill up some of these colors, and then we'll start. And I set up my palette in a very specific way, and I do it the same way every single time I'm working. That way I know automatically where each color is. So if I'm working on my Pashad box here, or if I'm working on a larger palette, I'll still set everything up in the same way, but it might be different proportions. That way, everything's in the same spot always, so you don't have to think. And I don't set it up like as in like Roy G. Biv with the rainbow. So, because that's the way light works, and color works slightly different than light. It's like can get kind of confusing, but when you're laying out color, you want to think about it in terms of its lightness and darkness. Another word for that would be its tone. So where is it on a value scale from black to white? And that's kind of how I lay out my color, from the lightest colors over to some darkest colors, with a couple exceptions of this kind of orange and this blue. But basically I try to like balance everything so its opposite is kind of like opposite it on my palette. Because a lot of working with color is working with complements, which are the opposites. So I'm just going to put out a little bit of color here. And then we're going to start painting this jar that's here. I think I'll put a little bit more of this out. So, I don't have gloves on yet, but I will be putting gloves on very soon. Actually, I can probably even do that now. Because with paints, they can be toxic. Not necessarily on your skin, but if you consume them. But the reason I wear gloves is, one, to keep it off my skin, because I hate getting paint on my skin, but also it keeps the rest of your stuff clean too. So that means, like, if I do get paint on my gloves, I'm going to wipe it off my gloves. I'm not just going to leave it on there, because then it'll get on my tools. And if it gets on my tools, then it gets on your clothes, and then it eventually finds its way into your body. So best practices are encouraged with that. Some colors you'll just kind of find out through doing this. You're going to need more of, and some you're going to need less of. This has to do with kind of like how you mix colors, but it'll also have to do with personal preference on how you respond to colors. Because everyone sees color slightly differently. I don't think it's a universal thing. So everyone will kind of like mix things slightly differently. I think the one thing we all are very good at is seeing value. So tone and value are the same words, essentially. They mean the same thing, which is, how something is on a dark or light scale. I'm going to probably guess that in the evolution of the eyeball, creatures started to see dark and light before they started to see color. And so I think that part of our hardware is pretty universal. But I think where it is elsewhere with color is going to be a little bit different. Alright, so I'll leave that at that.
Peter, I'm gonna mute you.
Unmuted.
Okay, so got my palette laid out. I have enough paint to work for the surface that I'm working on. Again, this is something that will just come from experience. Like when you start, you're probably going to put out too little paint. But I just know from experience like what paints I need bigger piles of and which ones are going to dry faster or not. So I got my paints ready. I got all my tools ready here. I have brushes off to the side here ready to use, and I've got my medium. Medium I'm using is just linseed oil mixed with some stand oil, which is just a thicker linseed oil. So, and linseed oil is the same thing as flaxseed oil, so it's the same thing. So it's just a vegetable oil that's mixed with pigment. So I've got that ready to go. I've got a bunch of rags to keep my brushes clean and my work area clean. So first thing I'm going to start with, I have my board here and I prepared this beforehand just with some like kind of sealing coats and something to give it a bit of a tooth for the oil to bond to. And it's got a little bit of an orange tint to it. You don't really want to paint on a white ground because it will mess up your perception of colors. So if you're putting colors onto a white ground, they're not going to read properly until you've entirely covered that white ground. And as soon as you do that, the colors will read differently. So if you put something onto kind of a medium colored ground, so somewhere in a mid-tone in terms of light and dark, it'll give you a better kind of color rendition of what you're actually doing. So I usually start by putting in some compositional lines, and this kind of goes down to like this thing called the golden section, which is how to break up a space into making pleasing compositions. This is just sort of like my very, very simplified version of that. Just from having done this a lot, this is all I need to kind of get that. But when I was first starting of it, I would geometrically kind of map out my picture plane and figure out where things were going to go. So we're going to be painting this bottle today. So I'm just going to do a loose sketch of that on here. And again, very loose. I'm just getting a general placement. I tend to err on the side of not doing a whole lot of drawing and just kind of working it out as I'm painting. You might be different in how you work. I think just kind of like knowing how you work is a large part of kind of making and creating, and you just have to kind of be confident in how you work and know that there is no right or wrong way to do anything, especially in art. There's a way that makes it easier to achieve certain goals, but if someone tries to tell you that there's only one way or a right or wrong way to do anything, don't believe them, because there are many ways, and they don't always have to be done specifically that way. Putting in some indication of the shadow here. So I might just kind of leave that at that for now. So I've got just a loose indication of my drawing in there. Again, I'm going to adjust this as I go. What I'm going to do now is mix up some medium values of my paint. So I'm going to start with my darkest and then work my way to my lightest, and I'm going to mix up kind of little piles of that color. So you always have to figure when you're starting to mix the colors, like what is your black? Because that's going to change in different images. Here my black is going to be this cap, and that's going to be closely followed by this sort of like dark reddy purple of the syrup that's in here. So I'll mix up a little bit of black first. I'm not going to need too much because that's really the only black spot in here. You can make black several different ways. I don't use any black color. I'll make a black out of ultramarine blue and some burnt umber. And depending on what kind of black you want, because black is basically just a neutralization of different colors. If you want to make a gray or a black, you just take complements and just keep neutralizing the color until it basically is what you want. I want this to be kind of like a dull black that's going to fade away, and I want the sort of black for the syrup to be an intense, vibrant black that's going to come forward. So that's why I'm just going to use ultramarine blue and burnt umber for this black. And I'll make a little pile and put it over there. I'm going to wipe my tools as I'm going because I don't want to contaminate colors. And I wear gloves to keep the paint off your gloves, but as I'm wiping, if it gets on my gloves again, just wipe it off. I like these kind of like mechanic towels. They're engineered for soaking up oil in mechanic shops, and so they work great for soaking up oil paint. So moving on to my next black, I'm going to use, again, ultramarine blue. I'm going to use some burnt umber as well, because that'll bring that value way down, so it's darkness. I'm going to add some alizarin crimson, because that'll give me that red. I'm going to mix that up, and I'm just going to sort of like judge it and see where I am. So that's pretty close to me. It looks close both within its hue, so its color, but also within its value, so its darkness or lightness. So then, color, you have kind of like three main things. You have the hue, which is the named color, so like this would be red. If I were to name it a color, you have its value, so where it is on the lightness or darkness. And you have its intensity or its chroma, which is how vibrant the color is. So if I wanted to make this more vibrant, I could add like a little bit of this quinacridone red, which will kind of increase the intensity a little bit. And again, I'm just looking for kind of like a median value in all these colors as I'm doing this initial part. But noticing the size of this pile, I'll probably need a little bit more of that for my painting, so I'm going to mix up some more now, because that is going to take up kind of a large chunk of paint. So I'm just looking for kind of median values now, and then as I start painting, I can adjust them either on the canvas or here on the palette. But having kind of your middle ground will give you a good starting place. So moving on for that, nice thing about painting glass is you don't really need a color for glass, because glass just kind of takes on all the colors of everything around it. So I don't need to mix up anything specifically for the glass, because it's going to be the sort of yellow of this table. It's going to be sort of that gray of the back wall. So working dark to light, I'm going to mix up the gray for that back wall. And usually when I start, I'll start pretty true to life for the colors I'm looking at. And then once I get everything kind of established, I might play a little bit and change things depending on kind of how I want them to be. But I'll start kind of pretty true to what I'm seeing. And a lot of the color mixing, I just know from experience how to get places pretty quickly. There's a lot of great videos, on the web on how to mix colors. But, I've been doing this for 20 some odd years, so it just takes practice. So that's a little bit darker than what I'm seeing there. I might add just a touch of light. And again, looking at the surface area I'm going to have to cover with that, I need a whole lot more, so I'm going to get a bunch more of that. That's a little bit yellow. So if you're mixing something and you're like, it's a little bit too yellow, then you have to take it back another way. So the opposite of yellow, its complement is purple. So you can I can add a touch of blue. What that's going to do is it's going to change the color. It's going to gray it or neutralize it a little bit, but it's also going to darken it. And it still looks a little bit too red for me, so I'm going to add a little bit more blue. And it's definitely darker than what I'm seeing there, but oil painting, you work dark to light. So you want to start with your darkest tones first, and then work your way into your lighter ones. It's just the way that paint works. Watercolor paint will be different. You work light to dark. So depending on the material you're using, you're going to kind of approach your methodology a little bit differently. But with oil paint, a general rule of thumb is to work dark to light, because you can always make something lighter. It's very easy, but it is harder to darken things down. So this should get me fairly close to where I want to be with that. That looks good for me for sort of a medium of that background. Put that there. Next, I'm going to need the yellow of this table, and that's probably all I'm going to need for this kind of simple scene here. Anything else, like the whites, I can just kind of like... Most white that you see in the world is like not pure white. It's like muddied out quite a bit. So I'll just take some white with a dirty brush and stick it on there later, and you'll see it'll probably read fairly well. So the last color I need to mix is for this table. So I'm going to start. I know it's a yellow because I'm looking at it. If you're confused with mixing colors, like narrow it down to the primaries. red, blue, yellow. And so if you need to kind of figure like what color is this, you'd be like, well, is it closer to yellow, closer to red, closer to blue? This is obviously closer to yellow. So it sort of gives you a place to start. So that's a yellow. I know it's going to have a little bit of red in it, just because it's not super, super yellow. I also know it's going to be grayed down a little bit, dulled down. So I'll put a little bit of burnt umber in there. Burnt umber is a great just sort of like thing to darken something down, but also to gray it down. I can also, brown essentially is an orange, if you were to name the color. So if you wanted to do the similar thing, you could just kind of mix up a darkish orange. In theory, you can mix every color with just the primaries and white. But in practice, it's helpful to have sort of different steps you can use to get you somewhere closer. So right now, looking at this is obviously too orange, and it's too dark. So I'm going to lighten that up. If you're also confused mixing something, get your value as close as you possibly can, so it's lightness or darkness, and then you can adjust the chroma or the color, the hue or the color. And this obviously is going to need, I might just take a little bit of that and keep it off to the side for some darker stuff, because you can see some of that in areas like here in the table. So I'll just keep a little bit of this now because I have it, and I'll add some more yellow and some white to bring that down to the actual table color. And again, I'm not looking for something perfect. You can always just squint, and if you squint down, it really knocks out a lot of the details and information that's in something, so that you're looking more at the overall generalization of an area. And this is still a little bit too orange, and it's a little bit too dark. So we can add a little bit more yellow and a little bit more white. And I'm not necessarily concerned with perfection in this. I don't think perfection exists. So like, why bother chasing it? Also, what we're doing as artists is we're interpreting things through our own kind of lived experience and reality and the way we see the world. So, if you just want an exact representation of something, take a photograph. Painting is about bringing your own experience to that. So I've cleaned up my middle part there. I cleaned up my tools. My hands are nice and clean. We're ready to start painting. What I like to do is take a little bit of my medium and just make kind of a little puddle in the middle here. And the medium is just to sort of like thin out the paint. It'll add a little bit of gloss to the paint as well, and it'll make it a little bit smoother to apply to the surface. So I'm going to make a little puddle of it there, and from this puddle I can kind of draw from with my brush as I'm working. I can also dip my brush directly into this over here, but this just keeps all my focus here, and so I'm not distracted. So I have a little selection of brushes. I'm going to start big and might work my way small. There was a saying in the Renaissance that you start with a broom and you finish with a pin. So look at the overall stuff and get to the details later. Sometimes you don't really even need the details most of the time, because our brains are used to like taking minimal information and making sense of it. So as long as you give your brain enough information to kind of suggest something, it will complete the rest of the puzzle for you. And that's kind of another fun part of painting and with working visually. So I've wet my brush in a little bit. I've just put a little bit of medium in there, and that's just going to kind of help it accept the paint up into the bristles. So I'm going to pull from my pile, just from the edge of it, not stabbing into the middle, taking a little bit of my medium. And I'm going to work, again, dark to light. So I'm just going to kind of generally put in shapes right now. A little bit too much medium there. I don't want too much medium on there. I want it so it glides a little bit. I'm just putting in a rough kind of generalization of everything right now, and we're going to go back and we're going to refine things in a little bit. And again, remember, working dark to light, so I'm not totally concerned with detail or with getting in all these reflections and everything like that right now. Those can be put in easily later. I'm just blocking in forms, shapes. I don't want to thin this down too much. You can start seeing some transparency in there. That's not really what I want. I just kind of want it to glide smoothly on there, so that when I come along with more paint on top of it, it's sort of like ice skating. It just has a nice smooth flow to it, and makes it easier to apply more color. So just putting in kind of general stuff of what I'm seeing, and I'm not focusing too much on one certain area. I'm jumping around as my eye kind of starts to see different things. I will let myself be taken to those different spots. You don't want your paint going too far up into the bristle. This part up here they call the ferrule, and that's kind of like where all the glue is that's holding the bristles together. If you let the paint get all the way up into there, it's going to be really, really hard to clean, and as that dries, because you're not going to be able to get it all out of there, it'll make the bristles splay out. So you want to, as you're working, just kind of like keep, basically just like I take my thumb and my forefinger and just pinch the bristles and then pull everything out. You know, it's kind of wasted material, but in everything there's going to be some degree of waste. So you just kind of have to like know and plan for that. But you know, if all the paint is up in your brush, it's not going to be doing you any good because it's not going to get onto the painting, but it's also going to make your brushes harder to clean at the end. So I think I'm kind of good with this this color. Again, I'm working dark to light, so I'm going to keep going around here. I've got, this is the back wall. But I'm going to use the back wall for the shadow at the same time too, because it's a similar value. Again, meaning darkness and lightness. So I'll just throw that in. I can adjust things always later, especially if I'm lightening them up. It's super easy to do. Darkening things down is more difficult with oil paint. You can, but getting things down to an absolute black, if you've already put something other than that on, is going to be impossible. So you do kind of want to keep, kind of like, think about, working within that process. So I'm just going to throw a whole bunch of this on here. Again, I might change my mind about this later in terms of like the actual colors that I'm using, if I feel something could be more interesting for the painting. Because there's a couple things here we're working with. We're working with the scene that we're looking at. You know, we're working with translating that information onto this plane. But we're also kind of like creating something and using our interpretation of this experience. So we don't have to represent exactly what's there. And I kind of actually feel that doing that is a little bit boring sometimes. So I will often put things in and then change them afterwards. And I'll also tend to jump around a little bit. I like to jump around because rather than putting all my intention into getting one specific area perfect, like I said earlier about color changing as you put other colors on, you know, your perception of one thing will change depending on how something else is placed beside it. So that's why it's good to kind of like really get a lot of your painting blocked in or thrown in before you get too concerned with making all the details perfect. What I'm doing here is I'm just testing like how that's going to like flow on the surface, and if I need more flow to it, I'll get more medium. I may have come too far into that there. I can probably adjust that a little bit afterwards, but for now we can leave that. And I can adjust, like I was saying with getting the median color, you can adjust that as you're going by pulling your other kind of colors in to push it one way or another. So here I wanted a little bit more yellow and a little bit brighter. Again, I'm still using this big brush, same brush that I've been using for everything. I'll switch to smaller, more detailed brushes later, but for now, I'll leave it with this. And also kind of while I've got some of that, you know, you can start, like I was saying, that glass is just kind of like everything around it that's reflected. Just start throwing some of that in. Sometimes things just aren't going to make sense until you get to a certain point in the painting, and then all of a sudden it just sort of like comes to life. So you have to kind of like trust yourself in what you're doing and just kind of like keep working and keep adding onto it. Oftentimes for me, like the painting really comes together almost at the last minute when working in this method. You know, this is working alla prima, painting from life. There are many, many different ways to paint and to work. You know, in different times, I'll totally pre-plan a painting down to the last kind of detail before I start painting it. And then it's just sort of like a matter of execution. But this method is much more different because it's perceptual. You're responding to something in real time as you're seeing it. And there's all sorts of stuff you'll be responding to here too. Like as I'm looking at this, I'm also seeing something else up in this corner here, which, you know, I might just kind of throw something in. The scene I'm looking at, it's kind of the white of the window trim. I'm going to take probably a little bit of other junk that's on my palette to kind of knock that down a bit, because pure white is not really what I want for that. So this white that I'm putting on there is, you know, it's pretty grayed down from a pure white, but you know, put up against next to these other colors, it will read fairly white. And kind of like balance contrast in my paintings a lot too. So as I'm doing something there, I might kind of come down and bring some lightness down into this corner as well to create some sort of like dynamism. So now I think I can probably switch to a slightly smaller brush and start adding a little bit more of the details in this bottle here. So I'm just taking all the other colors that I have around and I'm using those for the value of the things that I'm seeing. Oftentimes you can get the color almost totally wrong, but if it's value, so it's lightness or darkness is correct, it will read correctly as a painting, which is kind of neat. And I think that's where the fun in using color comes in, is because you know, kind of once you understand how color works and how it works for you, because again, I think it works differently for everybody, you can start to have some fun and change colors, so long as they're kind of lightness or darkness, their value is right. They'll still read right. I'm always wiping my brush, especially when using kind of whites or light colors like that. Every stroke I put on here, I'm picking up a little bit of the color that's already on there. So if I want to keep that clean, I need to keep wiping my brush after kind of almost every stroke. And I'm not trying to put in all the detail, because again, your brain will kind of like make sense of whatever you or try to make sense of whatever you throw at it. So I don't need to put in every single detail everywhere. Generally, when you're working, it's nice to have a brush for light colors and a brush for dark colors. That way you can keep the two separate. So if I want to go back into this, reestablish some of this black that's up in here, you know, I'm going to take a fresh brush that has no light color whatsoever in it, because that's going to, it's not going to give me a full black. So now I've kind of got like a basic structure in here. This is sort of like, you know, building a foundation for a building, and now you're starting to kind of like put something on top of it. And this is kind of where you can start to kind of play and have fun a little bit, because you've got your structure in there, and so you know kind of generally where things are going to be, and now it's kind of reestablishing what you want. See, I was able to bring that black down again over that white side, but if you're able to tell, there's just a teeny bit of that lightness here on that brush now, so I got to wipe that right off, otherwise that's going to screw me up when I go back in again. So I'm reestablishing kind of some of these darks that are in here, and if I really wanted to establish that even further, I could mix up another sort of like black. I'm just going to use some, before I put burnt umber, ultramarine blue, and alizarin crimson in. Right now I'm just going to use ultramarine blue and alizarin crimson. Essentially that's going to give me a really dark purple. and that'll have more kind of chromatic vibrancy than the other. So like you won't really be able to tell too much, and maybe not in the video here, but in real life and especially in good lighting, it'll be just enough for your brain to kind of be like, oh, that resonates a little bit more than that other spot does. So I can put in some of this other junk if I want to now. Like here I'm seeing kind of these reflections. So you can see like putting a white or light over a dark, super easy. But if I wanted to go back in and reestablish some of those darks, might be a little bit more difficult. Now I'm just kind of looking at reflections. I'm looking at things I'm kind of like responding to within this scene. I want to establish this bottle a little bit. And then I'm probably going to want to play with color quite a bit. I think color is like one of the most fun parts of painting. It's also something that's really difficult to understand. It took me like 20 years to kind of really understand color. So this part is okay. I think I'm going to start playing around a little bit. So now, ideally I'm like not really thinking about what I'm doing. I'm letting myself respond to what I'm seeing and kind of like hoping that in that all my training and my practice and my knowledge will allow me to kind of accomplish what I want. I think that's kind of the ideal in painting and in art. That's sort of like getting to the point where you can just kind of like shut yourself off and let yourself respond to what you're doing and what you're seeing. Fun things to create drama and effect is sort of like a dark against a light will always create a sense of depth and a sense of drama. Look at like 17th century Dutch painting, it's all about that, especially people like Rembrandt. Lights against darks, creating drama. And people love drama. So, and you can use your brushwork to describe a form. I could do this totally differently with my brush, but I think there's something fun about using your brush strokes to your advantage in what you're painting. Vincent van Gogh probably is someone who did this very fun. His paintings, it's all about color and brushwork. And he was very expressive with how he kind of put paint down. And I think it makes it a fun painting to look at and kind of experience. Rembrandt also had a saying that paintings are for looking at, not for smelling, meaning that if you get caught up in the details, you've got your nose right up in the painting, and you're not kind of paying attention to what it's about, which is kind of the experience of something. And so that's why it's good, I find it's good not to get too caught up into things. Sometimes you can even like put a table between you and your paintings that you can't get too close to it, to force you to kind of like stand back and see it. Because oftentimes when you're looking at something, you're going to be looking at it from the opposite side of the room, not from right up on it. And having said that, I see something back here. I want to throw this shadow in. So now it's just sort of like, now it's kind of refinement, going around, putting in information. Got this other color here too if I want to kind of put in some of the different colors that are in this table here. And this is where you can really start having some fun because, it's not so much about, for me anyways, getting all those exact details in. It's getting kind of the overall feeling of something. And then through that, it's like relaying and translating that information on to whoever's looking at the painting. And there's no magical qualities about oil paint. I mean, it literally is a colored powder mixed with vegetable oil. So there's nothing inherently magical about the medium. I think a lot of people get intimidated by oil paint just because it has such a weighted history within kind of Western art, especially. But it's just colored powder mixed with a binder, which is the same thing paint has always been. You know, old pictographs, so like paintings on the sides of cliffs or things like that, cave paintings, rock paintings. You know, it's always just a colored powder, which was usually a dirt or crushed rock or mineral that they had access to, mixed with some sort of binder, which sometimes was like animal blood or urine, and then kind of like put on a surface. And that stuff lasts for thousands of years. So oil paint is a pretty new material in terms of the history of human creation, which I think the history of painting, you know, goes back at least 100,000 years, and I would imagine much, much longer. All right, so now this is where I can start having fun with color, knowing what color does. You always have kind of like light colors and dark colors, even within the same thing. Like this yellow, that's a darker yellow, that's a lighter yellow. One's going to recede, one's going to come forward. So like I can use a red in here for that, and that'll add a little bit of life and vibrance to that area. And I can take even like a different red and put that here. And you can see like one recedes and one kind of comes forward. And so you can have a lot of fun with this type of stuff with painting. I think just kind of like getting something exact and precise in terms of, you know, representation is a great exercise in understanding a material. But for me, like, I'm interested in making something fun and enjoyable to look at. And with some sort of life and vibrancy to it. So that's why I start to kind of like play around quite a bit. And this is kind of at this point in the painting where I start to do that. Is because now I'm not thinking about building a painting anymore. I've already got that structure in there. I'm thinking about kind of like having some fun with it. I'm going to add a little bit of kind of like highlight into the top of that, because we can start building some kind of form and structure within this stuff. I'm still working light to dark. You know, I'm going to leave my lightest lights till last, but you can see when you put a little flicker of light on things, you know, it really starts to give things form. See, now I wish I'd mixed up more of this dark brown, because I've been using it quite a bit. So, mixing up more than you think you're going to need, I would recommend it. Do as I say, not as I do. So this painting, like, I could easily call it finished now. I'd probably want to play around and have some more fun with it before I did that. There's different ways you can do that. I mean, if you really want to kind of get expressive, you can just kind of like take something totally crazy, like this blue here, and like throw it on and leave it. And that adds like, you know, fun and vibrancy, but also like a little bit of like visual interest within the actual painting itself. There's a term called rewards for looking. And I think that's something to think about as a painter too. It's like rewarding your audience for actually like paying attention to what you're doing. And like there's fun things you can do in that. I think I might do a couple more of those. This is a pretty... So all my brushes, I like natural bristle brushes because they hold paint better. Synthetic brushes, like if you look at them under a microscope, their bristles are super straight. And so they don't hold and release paint the same way a natural bristle brush will, because natural hairs will have some sort of waviness to them. So within all these hairs, there's more space for that paint to kind of live and be released. And that's why I like natural bristles. These ones are all hog's hair. But I have different stiffnesses of them. So this one's like very, very soft. whereas these are much more harder. So different ones will give you different effects. And that's why I like to have kind of a variety of brushes to use. What am I doing with this? I'm doing that. There's different colors you'll start to kind of like use over and over and over again and kind of like build your personal style. And that's just kind of like, that'll come down again to, just having experience doing. So there's a lot of things that I'll kind of go back to again and again, just because I like or know the way that they work. So I think knowing when a painting is done is probably one of the harder things, and it's slightly subjective as well. I think ideally you don't want to overwork something too much. I like it in paintings when there's something left for me to figure out within it. The artist hasn't kind of like handed me an image on a platter. So I try to kind of do that with my own work. Having said that, oftentimes I will overwork something just because I do get caught up in the details. So it's nice, like a nice exercise to get over that is to have plein air painting is great for that because the light changes so fast. You can't work too long on something just because you're going to have different lighting. Or you can just kind of have a timer and be like, I'm going to work on this painting for an hour, and then whatever I get done, that's it. It'll come with practice. It'll come with doing. I think I might just do one more thing on this and call it done. What that is, I don't know, but I'm going to go back to kind of some of my go-tos and see if they do what I want. Done. Thanks for joining.
Can we get a close-up of the picture? Maybe?
Oh yeah, let's get a close-up. Alright, so there we are. And that's what I was painting.